Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is the final installment, episode 9 in the series, What Makes Marriages Work. In this episode, Dr. Scoresby shares how you can organize your family and use it to create happy and lasting relationships with your children. This makes rearing them more enjoyable, and it prepares them to have successful relationships with other people. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast, and firstanswers.com to find tons of relationship resources.
I am speaking about the role of family relationships as an essential feature in rearing your children. My purpose is to explain how you can organize your family and create an environment for your children and use it to create lasting good relationships with them. This makes the experience of rearing them more enjoyable and also prepares them for a successful life with other people. There is abundant research showing that the modern-day problems of chemical abuse, pornography addictions, and acting out sexually are more often found in families where there is either too much control and rigidity or too little influence at all. This means there is usually undeveloped relationships between individuals and members of their families. If we added other emotional problems most commonly found in Americans' children, such as defiant and angry teens, anxiety and depression, and suicide, we would discover that quite often something is lacking in the relationship experience of these children as well. Not 100% by any means, but a strong tendency nevertheless. I have provided psychological treatment for these types of challenges over the years, and in doing that have learned that quite often parents and children do not work together to form the type of relationships that are healthy and happy. As the years have passed, there seems to be an increasing number of people who either have fractured family relationships with their children or who have some difficulty with the children or with the people their children marry. I hope to help you avoid either of these possibilities, plus make your relationships with your children much more satisfying. I'm not speaking about the idea of just forging a good relationship with your children as part of their growing up. I also wish to give emphasis to the idea that families are made up of many different relationships, and when parents as leaders influence every relationship in their family, they can and will create an environment that exerts tremendous positive influence on children, so that their children achieve at high levels, develop positive social and emotional skills, and so that they are mentally and emotionally healthy individuals. They will also be law-abiding and morally mature people. In the way of background, let's examine the dynamics that take place in your family. 90% of your time as parents will be spent on 3 things. One is how you organize and get work accomplished. This will include the work of your careers, your household work, getting your children to get their chores done and their school homework completed, and a practice schedule for talents and abilities accomplished. Some families give great emphasis to these tasks and make certain that every child learns good work habits. Because this is sometimes fraught with frustration for both parents and children, though, many parents nowadays do not ask children to do much at all, except perhaps schoolwork, and even that might not be given much emphasis. The point is, as a parent, the emphasis you give to performing tasks and requiring children to work, plus the rewards and recognition for work, will be used by your children to develop their own attitudes about work and achievement. You can, for instance, get your children to work by nagging, pressuring, and demanding, and standing by them to see if they are doing what you ask. If you do, you might be like the parents who do that only to discover that in elementary school, their children often will hear their teachers giving instructions, but will wait until the teacher comes to their desk before they will start, just like what happens at home. You can teach your children independent work habits and help your children learn to start, finish, and perform with some standards of excellence. And if you wish, you can reduce the pressure by not requiring, as I mentioned, much of your children. Besides the work involved, you will also spend considerable time establishing some system of rules, including what they are and how many, how you want to enforce them, and how much emphasis you want to give to children being influenced by them. You might, for instance, have a rule that regulates children's behavior getting up in the morning and going to bed in the evening. You might set up a rule that puts less exciting activities before what is more enjoyable, such as requiring your children to do their homework before watching TV. You might also have rules for riding in the car, regulating language, how kids treat each other, and so forth. Some families have a large number of rules, and some families have very few. The emphasis you give to rules and compliance to them will provide a basis for how your children will feel about them. If you set a few rules and enforce them patiently and calmly, your children will more likely come to accept legitimate authority and respect it. If you're harsh and threatening, your children may learn to comply with rules, but have more anxiety about whether they are doing well. How do you think one mother enforced rules in her family if you learned that her 14-year-old daughter took 3 hours to clean the bathroom to make sure everything was done right? Unless that is unclear to you, rules apparently were very important, and the mother put a great deal of pressure on her daughter. Now, some children may respond by desiring to be obedient, some by simply being compliant, some by malingering, some by being defiant, some by rebelling, and some by not considering any rules as important. The third part of family life, other than the work and the rules, is the focus you give to the quality of relationships between you and your spouse, between you and your children, and the relationships that exist between your children. In this case, you will understand the need to spend time with your children, communicate with them to learn about and understand them, taking their personal needs and desires into account as you parent. You will spend time teaching children how to speak with you, showing respect for them, and asking them to respect you. You might also teach them to develop good listening skills. And if you're really good at relationships, you will help them identify the consequences of their actions for you and for the rest of your family. This will include teaching children to communicate well so they do not say rude, mean, and hurtful things, and you will be sure to teach them to improve how they deal with differences so they don't quarrel. You might be like the family I was visiting on one occasion, which showed a very amazing notion about relationships. While I was saying goodbye, one of their sons, age 5, came to his mother and said, "Tommy and I have some differences, Mom, and we need an arbitrator." And she said, "Okay, I'll be there in a moment." I have thought about that on many occasions, realizing that this mother and father had taught their children that instead of quarreling, they should ask somebody to come and help them arbitrate their problems. There are, of course, many relational skills, and depending on your desire, you will make relationships more or less important in your family. And as a parent, you'll probably hope your children will spend time with each other that they enjoy and be or become friends with one another. Now, out of these three things, you might have a preference. If you are rule-oriented, you might teach and set a rule, plan to enforce it, and even discipline children by removing privileges and imposing some consequence. If you are work-oriented, you might set up goals, use rewards for achievement, ask children to do chores, and make accomplishing work highly important. The point is that what you give emphasis to will often determine what you choose to do in response to your children's actions. Now consider the example of a single mother who worked full-time. She had her 4-year-old child being taken care of by a live-in babysitter. When she came home in the evening, she often was met with messy rooms filled with toys scattered everywhere. Now think with me, what would you do? Would you set up a rule and provide a reward if the child cleans up afterward? Would you teach about the importance of finishing what you start and assuming responsibility for keeping things clean in an attempt to educate your child? Or would you come home, lie down on the bed with your child and caress his arms and legs and talk for 5 minutes and then say, "I'm going to fix dinner, so why don't you pick up your toys while I'm doing that and then come into the kitchen so we can talk?" That's what she did. She was using her relationship with the child as a way of influencing and educating him. Now we can see that all three of these family environment conditions, rules, work, and relationships, are useful. But there needs to be some formula that very successful parents do that less successful parents do not. So we'd look at a family where the parents were happy and successful, and where the children were developing, had their share of mistakes or problems, but on the whole were doing well. These are the most successful parents, and we would like to know what they do. Now, besides teaching children good relationship skills, they have a very practical purpose. Whether your children learn to work well and whether they will accept family rules will largely depend on the quality of your relationships with them and the quality of their relationships with each other. This does not mean that you can be permissive with your children or indulge them by giving everything they want, hoping they will work and obey in return. Children reared by permissive parents often have poor impulse control and are vulnerable to other kinds of chemicals or other challenges. And children who are overindulged by their parents often become angry people, especially toward their parents. And as I mentioned, research shows that a very high percent of the problems children display growing up are activated in families where parents are too controlling with rigid rules or so passive and permissive there's no organization at all. Now, something else is required. I propose that you learn about the use of the powerful influence of relationships to integrate the work and rules in your family so that work and rules are served by the high-quality relationships you create for your children. I'll give you an example. One mother approached me and told me that she had a 17-year-old daughter she had caught sneaking out at night and going over to a boyfriend's house who was quite a bit older than her, and she worried about her. She wanted to know what to do. I proposed to her that she invite this daughter to lunch, and while they're sitting and talking, turn to the daughter and say, "I would like to know how important your relationship with me is to you." So she did that, and then her daughter said, "Well, Mom, it's very important. Why do you ask?" And the mother said, "Well, you tell lies to me, and that means that my relationship with you is not important. And you're doing very high-risk things with this boy, and it's different than what I and your dad have asked you to do. So if you value the relationship with me, wouldn't you do something different than that?" What is interesting about this situation is the daughter then had to choose between the relationship with her parents and the sort of surface relationship she was cranking up with this boy. Now, to give you an idea about how much is involved here, in a family of 5 people, there are at least 10 different 2-person relationships, and in a family of 7, there are over 50. All of these can exert influence over a developing child, and collectively they do much to create happiness and fulfillment if they're organized well. Given that this is true, if you as parents are not fully informed about these relationship possibilities, it's entirely possible you are failing to use one of the most significant tools available for rearing your children in a healthier and happier way. So let's review some different forms of family relationships to see how your role as parents may focus or fail to focus on family relationships. Please remember that I'm not proposing that work is unimportant and rules are unimportant. I am proposing that instead, if you focus on relationships, you'll be able to get a very healthy balance, and your children will be more likely to obey the rules and learn how to work as you desire. So the first relationship I wish to address is family leadership. In fact, everything that happens into your families begins with your shared leadership. This is the type of relationship you and your spouse have, which is then applied to organizing your family. Or, if you're a single parent, it is the way you go about organizing and managing all the details of your family so you can manage most of them by yourself. The research is very clear about the effects of family leadership. First of all, it matters a great deal and should be looked at by parents to see what type of leadership they are providing. I note the strong research evidence that children are more likely to be successful if the 2 parents are unified and work together as a team, and then apply a form of leadership called authoritative leadership. That's authoritative, not authoritarian. A single parent can apply the same form of leadership, but will need to have time and energy to begin and then carry it out. Authoritative leadership is expert leadership, where parents are clear about their ideas for how families are to be operating. They are knowledgeable about children. They help children develop and grow, and they implement a child-rearing method that includes teaching, training, and mentoring. Authoritative parents typically have their own accomplishments And because of these accomplishments, they want their children to participate in being successful like that as well. Now, such leaders provide a lot of emotional support in the way of warmth, affection, and they also have high expectations for their children to perform well and work with them, and they will mentor their children until they become competent. In contrast, authoritarian leaders have excessive emphasis on rules to the exclusion of relationships and work. They exert control and insist that it will be complied with. Permissive parents have few rules, are less involved with their children, and democratic parents invite children to be involved by voting and sharing in the authority of family government. And that would be okay if in a family of 7, the father and or the mother had 8 votes. Authoritative leaders are neither passive or permissive. They are not over-controlling, even though they might be firm about what they expect. Please remember, it is the unity of the parents and the consistency of standards and support to achieve them that makes possible for children to thrive. Some parents never create an organized plan for their families in terms of how they integrate the work, rules, and relationships of family life. The parents who fail to organize their families make their families and their children more vulnerable to outside influences. It is often the case, sadly, that children's activities such as friends, school, and church begin to exert increased influence over the time family members have to be together. The reason why that's sad is because sometimes when that happens, we don't regulate it very well, so there's a healthy balance between time with family, time with friends, and other external activities. When this situation occurs for authoritative parents, they will bring their family together and give emphasis to a balance between family time together and the nature and number of activities children and parents participate in. This will be designed to organize both outside family activities to ensure they are successful and internal family activities to maintain the quality of family relationships. Now, while arguing and conflict is commonly part of many families, successful parents seek to limit it by teaching alternatives to arguing and may even establish boundaries that some form of hurtful language is not acceptable. Some forms of mean behavior will be eliminated, and many positive influences such as cooperation and mutual respect will be taught, and the children will be expected to demonstrate these qualities. Family members may meet together in family meetings to talk over their progress and enlist each family member's support and participation. Now, what do we conclude from this? The type of leadership parents provide makes a big difference in whether children succeed. Further, the type of leadership parents provide will determine how much emphasis they give to work, to rules, and to relationships, and to see whether or not those 3 crucial parts of family life are balanced. Now, further, rather than letting relationships develop automatically, very successful parents of successful children are very interested in establishing good relationships for themselves, and they use these good relationships to promote obedience to rules and achieve good work habits. I would like to share with you some observations that I've made over the years about how powerful some forms of behavior are for parents to children. And when parents display these, good and bad, the memories of these experiences tend to last for a very long time in the lives of their children, even up to adulthood. So anything you do as a parent might become memorable to your children. But there are a few things that stand out as being especially influential and unforgettable. These affect children in terms of how they think about themselves, but the actual impact is shown later on in their relationship toward others. I repeat, there are a few things not to do and a few things to do if you wish your children to be successful with people and high-quality relationships with them. Here are 2 or 3 things you would not do. Do not use name-calling. If you are angry and you call your child a name such as stupid, too dumb to know better, nincompoop, or jackass, these words only heard once remain in a child's memories almost forever. It is also a good practice to avoid shaming a child by telling him he ought to be ashamed of himself and you are ashamed as well. Do not get caught up in arguments about rules and work where you feel like your authority is being threatened. And so in order to establish your authority, you escalate in anger and frustration to let your children know who is in charge. This is often becomes emotional and physical abuse, and the effects of that linger for a long time. It is best, I have found, to have a great deal of power as a parent, but seldom use it. Do learn how to use positive relationship skills to motivate children to work and obey rules. You can teach them to spend time, communicate, love well, and so on. But there are some other do's which often are left out of people's awareness where parenting and child relationships are concerned. So I'm going to give emphasis to them and point out why they are so important. The first of these is the learning and demonstration of empathy. It is not just an important relationship skills to be able to look at and understand somebody else's situation and then feel at least a portion of what they feel. We're talking about the use of empathy as a very profound form of dealing with children's behavior. So number one, being able to ask children about what they think and feel and then have empathy for them is a very good practice. It is also true, however, that when a child has a volatile reaction, gets upset, frustrated, runs to his room, and you go to his room and talk with him, if you can identify his feeling, that is, if you can show empathy, his anger and frustration will quickly disappear. Empathy allows you to communicate to your children that you know, understand them, and love them, so practice and be good at it. It is also important for you to do or to be comforting. The idea of comforting when somebody is sad or hurt is a very common thing. But what isn't common is the idea that research shows that when parents comfort, their children learn that there's an end to negative things and they don't have to endure them. When parents rear a child without comforting or showing them how to comfort others, they often come to believe that there is no end to the depression or unhappiness, and they are simply controlled by how long those feelings stay. I would also like to propose that regarding children, it is extremely important to listen, and to listen, and to listen until the child feels understood. It is so crucial to communicate that you want to understand and that you appreciate what he is saying, and doing that will help him be interested in being obedient to you and to do other things that you hope for. It is also important to do a process of accepting the child when the child feels unacceptable instead of being judgmental and critical. There are times when you need to say this is not good and say to a child, you need to do something different. But you don't reject them and say, I'm not going to spend time with you and I don't want to be around you, or pass a quick judgment about their behavior because you're anxious for them, but you end up contributing to their feelings of inadequacy and hurt. Acceptance is a powerful do for parents. Serve and care for others. Teach your children to do that. There are a lot of ways of organizing a family so you can help each other with chores, you can give gifts, you can give compliments, you can do numerous things where children learn to actually serve and care for other people. It's a relationship skill, and it makes a huge difference when your children come to dealing with people from diverse backgrounds. It is also true then useful for us to learn cooperation and teach our children to cooperate. It's like saying to a child, come on, I'm doing dishes and let's cooperate. You do something, then I'll do something, and we'll work together and get this done. If that's not possible, then you try to find some other area where you can contribute and see if you can get some cooperation to make that possible. Now, the last do and don't I want to talk about is this one. Do tell the child accurate information about himself, and even though it might be negative, if you can be calm and objective, you can give your child feedback and also add a positive tinge to it. It is important that parents are giving their children accurate information. If a child is not doing well in school, don't gloss over that. The child is not doing as well as he wants, at least in school, and needs to do something different. I'd like to move on now and share the idea that the conditions in your family where work, rules, and relationships are concerned change as your family matures. Families grow and change as your children grow older and you gain experience. By viewing your family as growing and changing, you will be able to see how to adapt the amount of work and what kind of work, to adapt the rules and the relationships of your children so you can best promote family success and the growth of your children. I'm going to give you an example of the need to adapt. A college freshman, for example, may come up after class and say the following: I've lived on my own or with my roommates this year, and I just received a letter from my parents indicating that when I go home, I'm going to need to obey the same rules that I did before I came away to college. Well, a little thought will tell us that what the parents are trying to do is to be consistent, so even though an older sibling comes, they think it's best to have her follow the same rules. I think it's best to stagger them so that you teach your children the idea that it doesn't have to be equal and it still can be fair. And that kind of fairness means taking care of each person's individual needs, assuming that as time passes, everybody will be treated equally. Another example of the failure to adapt or to make changes might produce a lot of conflict between you and your children. It's simply better to anticipate change to some extent and prepare you and your children for it. A student in my class at the university one day told me that on a recent occasion he had somehow offended his father, and his father had taken his car away. And the students laughed because this was a mature college student, but he wasn't finished. And he said, and I'm 24 years old. And then everybody laughed. And then after the laughter died down, he said, and I'm married. So is the father still imposing some consequence because his son did something he didn't like? His dad needs to adapt. Now, there does not appear to be exact stages that families pass through, and every family is probably different than every other. But for the purposes of seeing how to adapt to change, please consider the family is going through 4 stages. The first one is called beginnings, and it begins with the birth of the child and lasts until the oldest child is 5 years of age. The second is called consolidation, and it begins when the oldest child is 6 and lasts until the oldest child becomes 11 years of age. The third stage is called flexibility, from ages 12 through 18 for the oldest child, and the fourth stage, called launching, can be from 12 to 28, depending on the circumstance for the child and for the family. We're going to launch a child not at 12, but children may leave home because there's a divorce or illness or some other kind of problem. Now, there are several things involved in each of these time periods, and I will mention only a few to show the need to make adaptations and that adapting relationships is part of good parenting. So, the beginning of a child's life, demonstrated by research, tells us that the qualities of families that help children succeed show the following conditions: a lot of parent-to-child stimulation, touch and speaking and so on; predictable care without any harsh physical treatment of children; establish a small rule system at about age 3, firmly and lovingly teach obedience to it until a child learns that a rule is a rule and that needs to govern his behavior in some situations; develop patterns of communication, praise, and recognition; and then give a 4 or 5-year-old child one or more simple tasks to complete, and begin the mentoring process to ensure you and your child work together so he or she learns to be successful. For example, if you took a 4-year-old child to his bed and said, I'm going to show you how to make your bed, and so you show him, you say, it looks just like this. Then you throw the covers back and say, okay, now you do it. And so you watch the child until you're sure he can make progress, and then you leave. But you come back in just a few seconds, and you congratulate him for continuing to work, or you encourage him to start if he's stopped. And you do that at a regular period so that the child never knows when you're going to return. That is one way of teaching independent work habits. And that can all be accomplished in the beginning period of a family's lifestyle. Consolidation, the second period, is a time when parents bring their families together and emphasize togetherness and things they do as a family. During this period, you'll notice that your children are getting more and more engaged in outside the family activities. So, you begin to adapt your response to different children. Stagger the rules for different children. For example, different bedtimes for older kids, different amounts of work, etc. Give children work they can do and teach independent work habits. Continue abundant displays of love and warmth and maintain frequent good communication. It is also important during this period to create family time of a variety of kinds, meals together, traditions, fun adventures, to build the concept of family membership. Emphasize cooperation, working together, and communicate the consequences for others when rules are not followed and work is not completed. And then, during this period especially, teach about empathy and compassion. Flexibility, or the third period of family development, is so named because families will add flexibility to their family to accommodate increased outside involvement of their children, especially an adolescent child. So here's what you learn to do during this period. You ask children to care for themselves in terms of their household chores. They can do things, so you invite them to. You invite children to consider whether they would like a lot of rules or a good relationship. They will always choose a good relationship, even though they are not certain what that is. Well, I don't know what you think a good relationship is, but I'm going to tell you my version. A good relationship includes a lot of communication between parents and kids, where they actively communicate without having to be pressured to do so. Secondly, it includes honesty and responsibility so that a child will say what he or she will do and then does it. So we have trust and confidence. And then third, it includes affection and warmth so that children and parents are affectionate with each other and communicate that they love each other. So here's the three in a good relationship. Doing what you say and saying what you'll do to build trust and dependability. To communicate a lot and to express warmth and affection for each other on a free basis where each person chooses to do that. So here's what you do. Give it a trial. Child is about, let's say, 12 or 13 or 14, and see if kids can participate in this manner. And if so, then pick a rule to adapt to show you desire your children to be less rule-governed and more responsible for the decisions they make themselves. So, for example, if a child goes out for the evening to play with friends, you could say, what time will you be back? And the child might say 11:30, and you might say, how about 10? Well, how about 10:30? Okay, 10:30 it is. I'll expect you home by then. Well, let's suppose the child makes it back by 10:30. He carried out what he said he would do. Now let's suppose that a child doesn't. Your choice is to impose some restriction, remove a privilege, ground the child, for example, or you can say, you know what? You didn't make it in at the time you said you would, and so I still have trust for you, but it's important that you do what you say next time, and so you give them another chance. You keep talking and working and mentoring to them until they can actually make decisions and do what they say they're going to do. We also invite them to participate in good family relationships and help you as parents. So gradually over time in flexibility, you gradually diminish the reliance on rules, remove a lot of the punishments for breaking them, and focus on inviting your kids to make decisions and then do what they've decided. Lastly, when we're launching or going through the launching process, we eliminate most rules except the ones that are just the very most basic. Focus on financial independence, succeeding with people, asking them to do their work that pertains to their own conduct, participating in family events as often as they can, and developing a strategy for education and their career. Relationship principles that make families and children successful now enables us to understand how to put all of this together, how families develop, and how they organize themselves so that there's a great integration of rules, work, and relationships. So what follows now is a description of the types of things you can do to organize your family. We call them the 6 best things or 7 or 8 best things parents can do for their children, because the research shows that these are the things that parents do who have children who go through the challenges of childhood and then adolescence and tend to be the more successful in adulthood. So here they are. First of all, make sure that your children see you parent them as a team. Be supportive to each other and do not allow a child to disrespect the other. Don't get angry and frustrated or upset, You just talk and visit and communicate that the child needs to be respectful. 2, it is important that these successful families teach morality skills. Morality has to do with what's right and wrong, and they are positive relational skills like honesty, integrity, responsibility, empathy, compassion, and loyalty. When you're busy taking these words and applying them to specific behavior in your family, you are teaching your children, how to apply values and moral concepts to their relationships. That means they are less likely to hurt themselves and other people. I've also already proposed to you that you correct or discipline a child by using relationship examples. Now, this may sound a bit strange to you, but suppose that I told you that the young child you're currently having trouble to is often the child that has least access to family communication. So the solution would be to improve the communication with his child. So let's suppose then this child annoys others, gets in conflict and frustration, teases and so on, and you go to them and stop that, and then you say, well, you're now going to have to spend time with me, and we're going to go get some ice cream. And we're going to talk and visit there and come back. Or can you do that? Yes. Some parents will think, well, I know, but if you do that, you'll just reinforce the bad behavior. No, you won't. You'll solve the problem, because the problem was a relational problem in the first place. It is also important to see that parents and children perpetuate attachments by engaging in some useful or shared activities. Find places and situations you as parents can form an attachment with each child over something unique to the child. Every child needs a unique skill as currency to participate in social life. Playing a music instrument, debate, sports, whatever that is, form attachments with children around what they are interested in. When you do this, you maintain this attachment and create memories that will last you for years and years and years. I also teach about relationship skills like how to communicate successfully, hold an evening practice session on how to introduce yourself to people, how to meet new people, how to apologize when you should, how to give compliments, one of the most significant forms of social behavior, how to give and receive compliments, how to propose activities that both people can participate and include others, how to avoid prejudice, how to avoid bias and discrimination, and how to avoid stereotyping people based on their ethnicity and so on, because it's a very harsh kind of experience for either the judge or the person who's judged. And then, of course, I'm going to propose that you adapt to changes in the children's age and growth, and it's like this. Adapt a rule here and there, adapt some work here and there, add some, take some away, make adjustments so that children know that the work and rules, are being adapted, but the relationship between you and them is the constant that begins in your family and lasts forever after. Now, having done some research about what it is that exists in families and what parents do that lead to their children's success, based on this research, we can identify 6 things that parents do to enable their children to be really successful and confident and assured, and free from addictions, mental and emotional challenges, and to become effective and confident with people. Here they are. Number 1 is to prepare more than you punish. That means when children make a mistake, instead of punishing them, you use the opportunity to teach and show them that there's just simply a different or a better way to proceed. You could punish if you want to some of the time, but you could also prepare kids to be able to perform the tasks you want them to perform or to follow rules and to participate in relationships. And then if they don't do that, then we're going to prepare them for some more. I'll give you for instance. 2 of my children got into an argument and they began to hit each other, which is not acceptable in my family. I went in and stopped them, and I brought them into the family room, and we sat down and said, you cannot do this. And so I'm going to give you a penalty that will help you learn. And the 10-year-old boy said, well, what is it? And I said, well, for one thing, you were playing a game and you had a difference of opinion, and so you didn't talk and you hurt each other. So I'm going to choose a game that is difficult for you to play, and I want you to play it happily all the way through to the end. And he said, well, what if we won't do it? By this time, I'm a pretty experienced parent, and so I calmly said to him, well, son, how long can you live without eating? He understood the message, and they went to play this game, and I checked to see them if they were being happy, and they were. And then I asked them to come and talk over some situation so that I knew that they could talk and visit instead of hit or fight. You learn to prepare your children more than you punish. It will be an enormous blessing to them and to you because you will get caught less often in these significant traps and difficulties where the more you punish, the more they disobey and so on. None of that. Prepare more than you punish. Principle 2, communicate more than you control. Some control is necessary with children, but there's much less of it that's required if you establish a good communication relationship. It's easy to do. You can just say, we need to talk about this. And if a child says, I don't want to, just wait a little while. The child will come and say, can I have my allowance or can I go play with a friend? You just calmly say yes as soon as we talk. And you make sure that they understand that talking with you and learning to be comfortable doing that is a significant thing for you and for them. It expands attention spans. It helps them learn more about people and about their own feelings and thoughts and control. If you emphasize that, and it's appropriate some of the time, if you do it too much, you get a very different outcome. You typically will get children who are either passive or they wait till they are instructed or they are angry and do not accept authority figures. Number 3. Learn to encourage more than you criticize. In an astounding number of studies, it is clear that criticism outnumbers encouragement from parents to children by a ratio of 10 to 1. 10 times more criticism than encouragement. That puzzles me because I know why it happens. It's like, get off, stop that, and don't do it, and you can't do anything right or whatever that is. But if you really wanted your children to learn to be obedient and to do the things you want, you would, in fact, encourage that. You would say, here's what I've noticed that's good. You'd catch them doing something good, and you encourage and help them, and you'd build them. And it's not about self-esteem. It's not that. It's simply encouraging them to focus on the good things they can do. Now, why do this? Well, every child will have chasms that are challenges to them. How do you motivate them to cross these chasms or to try new things? Well, if you have a history of encouraging them that they can be successful and work effectively, then when they face these challenges when they're a little older, you can say, I know you can do it. And you have put money in the encouragement bank, and they will believe you and move toward that. Number 4, the principle that successful parents use is called involve and individualize. This is very much like the idea of doing together time and allow alone time for couples and for children. But it's different in a way that we want to make sure that all of the children are involved with the family and with you, and they do a variety of things to maintain that involvement. We also, however, want to organize the family in such a way that we recognize the distinguishing features of each child in terms of how they're unique from every other child. One of the reasons why multiple children of multiple births may have some emotional challenges is because the parents tend to lock them together and say, you kids, or the kids this, and they allow them to talk for each other instead of individualizing them. And this is the child who loves purple. This is the child who's good at sports, and so on, and making sure that every child has an individualized identity. Number 5. Number 5 is extremely crucial, as all the others are. You need to love enough to set and maintain limits. We don't need thousands of limits. Children don't benefit from that. But most children need to know that there are boundaries that they should not cross. Hardly anybody who's healthy who doesn't have a limit on spending money, or who doesn't have a limit on temper tantrums, or who doesn't have a limit on lying and deceiving. So it really amounts to love to be able to say to a child, you can go this far and not farther. And then when they do, This is when you take them aside and you prepare them more than you punish, and you give them another opportunity to abide or comply with the limit. There are things you want children to not do. You probably don't want your young children to consume alcohol at an early age. Well, that's a limit. Or you want other kinds of moral behavior, like to not be mean, to not steal. Those are limits. So what you do is love enough to set these limits and maintain them. Last is a crucial one, is often not thought of in my experience, and is called resolve with your child instead of isolate them. In our culture, we believe that one of the worst forms of punishment is to isolate prisoners, to isolate people and put them in isolation, and then that helps them suffer. But today, if you sent your child to his room, what's in there? Toys, books, often a television set, other kinds of things that he or she can play with. And besides, if you just send them away when they make a mistake or are irritating, then they never have to learn how to do something different. So if you send them away, do it for a short period of time and then bring them back out and say, now we're going to resolve this. Or if the child is emotionally able to go through a discussion like that, then don't even send them away. The reason why we do this is we want children to know that there is a resolution and a solution to problems that they can find, and they need to learn to work on that so they're solution-oriented rather than just a cause of the problem. Now, let me review. Prepare more than you punish, communicate more than you control, encourage more than you criticize, involve and individualize, love enough to set and maintain limits, and resolve instead of isolate. Now, what are these 6 things? If you did that, you would be able to form an integration between work, rules, and relationships that allows each to have its place, but make relationships the lasting and more prominent part. And when you do that, your children feel safer, they tend to be more obedient, and they tend to treat each other kindly with more respect. And as I mentioned, it just makes a great deal of sense to use the relationships in your family to organize your family and to maintain the kind of family life that you hope for the most.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by FirstAnswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit FirstAnswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.